Cindy Swanson is our first speaker this morning. Cindy is the Human Dimensions Program Manager at the Rocky Mountain Research Station for the USDA Forest Service out of Missoula, Montana. She's been in this position for about 1 year. Prior to this, she was the Director of Watershed, Wildlife, Fisheries, and Rare Plants for the northern region of the Forest Service. For 9 years in that position. Previous to that, she served as the Wildlife and Fisheries staff in the Washington office of the Forest Service. Dr. Swanson has published extensively in the area of non-market valuation with a focus on wildlife and fish values. She received her PhD at Ohio State University in Natural Resource Economics in 1994 and had earlier degrees in wildlife biology and economics from the University of Wyoming. Please welcome Cindy Swanson.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. It was sort of touch and go for a while with fire transfer. We had everything canceled and then it loosened up a little bit and station leadership decided this was a really important conference to go to, so I'm really thrilled I could be here. And I'm also excited you guys are brave, talking economics first thing in the morning. I love it, so it'll keep me awake, but I hope I can sort of get you excited about the economic aspects of Aspen, particularly beyond those values associated with commercial values. That's really where my interest lies. And I got into the Aspen stuff sort of indirectly. My interest is non-market values of wildlife, and I sort of got cornered by David Burton at Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation yearly event, and we got to talking about the diversity of wildlife in Aspen, and he said, well, we don't have anybody that's really looking at economics. Can you help us out? So this is sort of a new field for me, and any feedback you have or advice, or if you know of data that I have not been able to find, I would love to have you guys send me an email and help me get more up to speed on economics. So that's what we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking about, is the economic value of Aspen beyond board feet. Scott Bell talked yesterday about some of the commercial values, and I'll touch on that a little bit just to give you perspective on how it fits into the broader framework of economics, but I won't go into it a whole lot. And so I appreciate the fact that Scott was here yesterday talking about it, and I need to visit with him to get better values. So the objectives for the talk I'm going to give is to expose you to the concept of total economic value and what those components are and how the measures we have for each of those components. And then I want to apply those concepts to Aspen. The data is real sketchy, so I make lots of assumptions, but to give you an idea of the economic values associated with Aspen. And I think most of them you're familiar with. You just might not have thought about them from an economic framework. But all these values won't be new to you. You've been thinking about them for years. And then talk about some of the needed research. If it looks like promoting Aspen through an economic framework is something that's important to this group to do, there's probably some basic data we could collect or you could help me find. All right. Divide total economic value into two different components. There's the use component, which means you actually touch and feel and use the resource in some manner. And then those non-use values, which is some of the things you know about Aspen, but you don't have to be right there using Aspen to have value for it. So direct use is, harvest values. Board feet, what is it worth in the mill, and what is it worth from a commercial standpoint. And then some of those other direct things. The diversity of wildlife within an Aspen stand is huge, and so it supports a lot of hunting values, fishing values in those riparian areas, and then fall viewing. It's big business in the east to go out and view those fall leaves, just beautiful, and that has a lot of economic value to those local communities. And then the other use value is some of these indirect. We know that from an ecological standpoint that Aspen's very valuable. It provides a lot of indirect values that we're just now starting to look at and quantify and be aware of. And those are those ecosystem services. Water filtration, helping with stream channelization, and providing biodiversity and some of that wildlife habitat. So it's a direct use it's a use value from the standpoint that it's real and you have to have it there, but it's indirect because we get services as a result of having that Aspen community available to provide nutrient filtration, municipal watershed, waste treatment, and things like that. And then these non-use values. Dale talked about it yesterday. We all just love Aspen. You know, when you see a picture of Aspen, you get this really great feeling because it's just beautiful and you can hear the sounds. And so we all have a lot of value associated with Aspen, even though we're not out there using the resource on a regular basis. And then these, so we call them passive use values. If you watch a TV show, a nature show that talks about Aspen, you really get a lot of value out of that and a lot of excitement knowing those resources are out there, even if you're not someone who goes and spends your October driving around looking at fall colors. And then the other piece is existence values. And I think this will really become a bigger issue as we look at some of the things associated with climate change. You know, it'd be a sad day if our children or grandchildren didn't get to experience Aspen in the way we do. You know, just getting in a car and driving and seeing it is such a wonderful experience that we want to make sure it's available for future generations to enjoy the way we have. And so those are the categories I'm going to talk about, and then I want to put it into a context related to Aspen to help you sort of think more about these different values. And I'm going to use data that I found for the New England states, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. I really struggled finding values for Aspen in the Intermountain West and the Rocky Mountain West. It's very unfortunate that if the data's out there, it's not in a place where people can use it or refer to it. And so I'm going to use an example from the New England area, but I think it's very applicable to here, and we'll talk about that. And I looked at both public and private forested land ownerships to give a sense of those values and how private landowners could maybe modify some of the work they're doing to capture these other values. And then again, does this data exist for the Rocky Mountain West? If any of you are aware of where I could go, I did a pretty extensive Google search and tree search and some of the scientific journals, but I really struggled finding much data. So some basic data about New England to give you sort of a perspective on what we're talking about. Aspen is 9% of the tree composition. So a fairly small component, but as you'll see, a very significant component. So think about not a big land base, but big values associated with it. You know, it's mostly in northern hardwoods, and that's where both most of the commercial values come from, and the biggest land base. And then some of the other ones, oak, hickory, spruce, fir. But we're going to mostly focus on that Aspen piece, that 9%. So sort of keep that in the back of your mind. And then land ownership. You know, being in the West, federal lands, public lands, state lands, not as much in the East. You know, mostly non-industrial private lands. So areas that they're not harvesting for value. So private lands that are not being used for commercial purposes. So an interesting base. I would have thought there'd be more industrial private lands, a lot more harvesting going on in the East. So that was sort of new to me. I didn't realize it was so non-industrial. So here's how I would categorize those values I alluded to related to Aspen and the categories I'd put them in. And then I'm going to go through and show you why I would put these different percentages on there. So the first one is that commercial use. And I separated commercial use, that direct use, and the direct use for recreation into two different components so that we can track those separately. And based on the data I looked at, commercial use is about 20%. And that seems, I don't know, when you think about it, you know, that might be one you'd think would be way higher. You know, people do harvest aspen, and the data I looked at showed it's becoming a bigger component of that industrial use is the harvest value. And then recreational use is related to not just fall viewing, but hunting and hiking and camping and some of those uses. And then this indirect ecosystem services, I felt was about 40% of the total value associated with Aspen. You know, as the East Coast grows, those areas that have aspen in it, I think will become more important because they represent biodiversity, high diversity of values, and a lot of support for some of that nutrient cycling, and then helping that stream channelization and providing shade. And then the non-use option value, we talk about decline of Aspen, but it's not going away anytime soon, at least not in our near future. So option value, but those non-use existence values, wanting that Aspen around for future generations in maybe the level we have it now and not smaller amounts. So these are the way I would split up the total value of Aspen. And now let's go through the data I used to come to these conclusions. So the first one, forest-based manufacturing, $15.7 billion in value for all harvesting in the New England states. Pretty significant pump of money into those economies. It employs almost 97,000 people. So a lot of people are getting employment from harvesting those lands. And remember how little is industrial. So there is some potential for those non-industrial private lands to maybe expand their commercial component of Aspen. And at least in Michigan, and again, this data is spotty from where I could find it, Aspen is becoming a higher and higher valued resource. They found that in the pulpwood market, that Aspen use and values have increased fourfold in the last 10 years. So more and more people are going to be looking at Aspen as a commercial resource. And as you think about that total value, that has sort of a mixed blessing. Really valuable from a commercial standpoint, but if it's only 20% of the value, is that really what should be driving how we manage Aspen? Is the commercial piece really what's driving the value of that resource? And so woody biomass is another thing that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue as we look at climate change and our carbon footprint. More people looking at how we use that woody biomass that we either leave in the forest or take out. And again, that's something that state and private's doing a lot of work on, and Scott Bell's probably way better able to talk about that. So I just took that 9% of tree composition and said maybe as a rough estimate, the value associated with commercial use is about $1.4 billion. And that seemed high. When I think of Aspen, it does have a commercial component, but $1.4 billion in New England is not a minor number. So a pretty important resource from a direct use standpoint and that commercial value. So the next one I looked at was recreation use, and they do have some data in the New England states on what people spend for forest-related recreation. And that amounts to $2.9 billion in revenue on a yearly basis. So in total, if you compare that to the commercial use of all tree resources, it's about a fifth of what the commercial resources are. Provides employment for over 23,000 people, so a very nice contribution to the economy. And I assume that at least 50% of that value is related to Aspen, and so $1.4 billion. So here's how I came with that 50%. Here are the forest-related expenditures that occur in the New England states that are related to forest-based recreation. And look at this fall viewing. I mean, it's phenomenal. If you add all the other ones up, it's half of what people are going to New England to spend money on. Big business, and I'm sure all of you are aware of it, and probably many of you have participated in going to the New England states and doing fall viewing of the foliage. Just gorgeous. And so I thought 50% actually was conservative, because if you look at wildlife viewing, if you want to see birds and lots of diversity, where do you go? Aspen stands. People like to camp, and then hiking. So I thought using 50% of that value of tourism related to Aspen was very conservative. And so if you look at just that direct use value, the commercial uses, by taking that percentage of land associated with commercial harvest, 9%, that's Aspen, and then 50% of tourism related, then I would say the value in the New England states of that fall recreation and commercial harvest is the same. And so they're comparable. But what are we talking about? We're talking about harvest. And that's not a bad thing, but I think we're forgetting that there's a lot more things people put direct expenditures into related to Aspen. People just love it, and they plan vacations around seeing it. I recently went from camping in a tent to camping in a trailer. I figured at 50 I could have a nice comfy bed. And so we get this magazine called Trailer Life. and they had an article called Autumn Ecstasy, and it's how to plan your fall vacation with your RV to go see fall trees. And one of the spots is Utah, but it's mostly New England based. So big business for us older folks that are approaching retirement. You know, we want to go camping in the fall and we want to go see Aspen. So that's sort of my first conclusion, and you can see all the assumptions I used to come to that, and you can probably question the assumptions. Very valid, because we don't have really good data. But I think you could say, at least in New England, that the commercial value and the recreation value are comparable. Okay, so how does New England relate to the rest of the world? You know, people go there for fall viewing, so it might be unique. And so I pulled up some national data. And so these are the top 6 activities from just purely number of days people participate. I didn't pull out anything special related to trees. These are just the top 3. So people, top thing they do is they walk and scenery, and then bird viewing and flowers. So I would say all of these are related to Aspen. You know, bird diversity, there was a study in Oregon that showed as you decrease the conifer composition and let aspen come back, you get a 50% increase in bird diversity. And so if it's true in Oregon, I've got to guess that it's at least comparable or similar here in the Rocky Mountain West. So all of these activities, I would say Aspen is a major contributor. So that's what's happening nationally. And then this is by state, what people participate in as far as viewing. So let's just go to Montana. 78% of residents in Montana participate in viewing scenery. Not surprising, gorgeous state. And so if you look at Montana, that sort of brown in the middle, highest percent participation of residents who participate in some sort of viewing of scenery. So let's go to wildflowers. And again, I saw some articles that said if you want to see the greatest wildflowers in the spring, go to an Aspen area and look in the understory. Just phenomenal amount of wildflowers. And so in the Rocky Mountains, 50% of people participate in viewing wildflowers. So this component. Higher than national. And then if you get into Montana and Idaho, it goes even higher, 55%. So these activities associated with Aspen for residents of these states in the Intermountain West, boy, that's what it's about. Natural environment, seeing scenery, watching, looking at wildflowers, and then also birds. You know, again, diversity. We in Montana, we do a lot of bird viewing. You know, you think of a macho state. That sort of surprised me. But anyway, so the highest percentage of residents in the Rocky Mountain West and in Montana and Idaho participate in these activities, and I would guess that that's why they moved to the state. You know, they love those resources, so they want to live near them, and they've moved there. So I think a lot of things that you could draw conclusions about how Aspen can contribute to that. Okay, fastest growing activities nationally, and this is percentage change from 2000 to 2007. Look at that. Viewing and photographing flowers and trees in a 7-year time frame, percentage change, 25% increase in people who participate in those activities. And then natural scenery, so things that are related to a beautiful natural landscape. And just Googling and looking at pictures, boy, people like to take pictures of Aspen in the fall. So, you know, not a great data source, but just going through Google, it's interesting when you put in these different combination of words, what you come up with. So as we get older, you know, we've gone from hiking and extreme sports, and we're now doing more and more of this viewing and photography, driving for pleasure. And again, I would guess that Aspen plays a pretty significant role in that. So getting a little more local, you know, we went from national to the Rocky Mountains, and then looking at why do people come to Montana? This is non-residents and what they're looking for when they're going on vacation and why they pick Montana. Again, they come to see the mountains and the forests. And I'm not thinking that Aspen's a huge component of that. I don't think it's up on their mindset, but I think it could be if we wanted to market that. And then that's a whole other question. Do we want to market those Aspen resources? And I would say if it saves that ecosystem from commercial development or condos, that maybe this is something we're not doing. So I went through like Utah, Montana, Colorado websites for tourism, and nobody talks about, I shouldn't say that, most of them don't talk about Aspen and fall colors, a little bit in Colorado, but I would think Colorado tourism would be all over fall viewing of Aspen, and it wasn't a huge element in their tourism site. That really surprised me. So of course, an open space, people don't want to come and see a lot of people when they come to Montana. That's what they think of when they do Montana. And then of course what you'd expect, Yellowstone and Glacier and rivers. So again, that's what people are looking for when they come and visit at least Montana. And I've got this data for every state, so you could look at it any way you wanted to. I just picked Montana because I love it. All right, and then they asked residents of Montana, well, why are you here? What made you move here? You know, we've got the 4th lowest per capita income in the country, but people keep flocking there. You know, 25% increase in population in the western part of the state. You know, why are you coming here if it's not for money? This is what they're coming for. They're coming for those aesthetic qualities. Income is secondary to their reason to come to Montana. Scenic beauty, you know, they want to go to Glacier Park and see all those gorgeous resources. Use and enjoyment, they want to go do hunting and fishing, and then wildlife viewing resources. So they're going to find their way to those Aspen places, particularly if they want to see great bird diversity. They're going to be there. And then again, habitat for wildlife. You know, Aspen's not the only place that you find wildlife, but lots of great diversity. And I guess we'll hear more about that this afternoon, wildlife. Okay, now let's get into those indirect uses, which are way harder to measure and are a little more ephemeral to people. Although you can measure these things, there's a lot of great economic studies. Unfortunately, none of them have been done that I could find related to Aspen. Along with riparian areas, most biologically diverse. And nothing new to all of you, but from an ecosystem services standpoint, if we want to help maintain that diversity, we need to really focus in on Aspen. Coarse filter, you know, the keystone species, a lot of people look at Aspen as an indicator of health of a lot of species. And then this nutrient filtration for municipal watersheds. And I don't know as much about that, but it came up a lot that Aspen does provide that good nutrient filtering. And then carbon sequestration. I went in and tried to find how much carbon is Aspen sequestration, how much Aspen it contributes to carbon sequestration. And I found some things in Michigan, but not a whole lot related to the Rocky Mountain West. So another area that I'd love to know more about, but I'm guessing that's, since it grows so fast, probably a really good source for carbon sequestration. So some of those ecosystem services that I bet most everybody in here, that's what you're studying. There is a way to value that, or at least make people aware that there's value associated with that kind of activity. And then this wildlife habitat. That really is what got me into my interest in Aspen, is wildlife habitat. And so, you know, some of these game and non-game species that go there and live there. And then the stream channels and pools. You know, a lot of woody debris that is associated, beaver dams and things like that help keep our streams healthy. All right, some of these option values. And like I said, Aspen's not likely to go extinct, at least not in our lifetime, and I'm guessing it won't for quite a long time. But there is a lot of value associated with its preservation. You know, looking at all the values that people place on Aspen. You know, if your own little Aspen, favorite place to go view Aspen, is in jeopardy, there's people who are willing to pay to see that that doesn't happen, or at least lessen the effects of it. And so if you want to participate in Aspen-related activities, fall viewing in the future, you want to know that it's going to be there for you to be able to do that. And then these existence values. You know, the Native American use, a cultural use of Aspen, using the bark for medicines and treatments, is pretty spectacular. And it's a value we probably don't recognize enough. And then again, we want future generations to have some of the same opportunities we've had related to going out in the natural environment and seeing wildlife, fish, and that natural setting, and not depending upon zoos. So making sure it's available for future generations. So, going through the economic data, have we captured the value of Aspen? I'd say just a tiny proportion, maybe 20%. and that's mostly the commercial direct use. You know, there are values associated with fall viewing and recreation, but it hasn't really been pulled down to the Aspen level. It's sort of a generic hardwood trees of the Northeast. People come and view it, whether it's maple or aspen. They really haven't targeted it to that value associated with aspen. And I couldn't find anything, like I said, related to aspen viewing values, even for like maroon bells or the city of Aspen. You know, people coming there for fall viewing. So I hope it's out there, and I just, through my searches, couldn't find it. So I'd say we've probably captured 20% from an economic standpoint. So when you have to weigh values across certain species, particularly from a tree growing standpoint, it's no wonder that aspen is not one that has really been looked at as a valuable resource. So here's what I think we've captured. We've gotten the commercial use about 20%. Recreation, direct use, a little bit of the fall viewing. We have some of those values, a little bit of the hunting values. Ecosystem services. I think all of you are aware and studying those ecosystem services, but we've not brought it into the policy economic arena to say, you know, these are really valuable habitats from a lot of standpoints, and we need to be aware of that from an economic perspective. So filtration, habitat, and then carbon sequestration. I'm hoping that'll be one that, with climate change, becomes an area of research, or a more vocal area of research. Some of the non-use values, have we captured those? Native American values, you know, there's lots of great articles from a social standpoint and a cultural standpoint, but I think maintaining those resources so they can continue in some of their traditional tribal activities has not been captured real well. And then future options and future generations. We've not really focused much energy in the Aspen community. So I don't think 20% is enough, particularly as we have more and more people moving into the Rocky Mountain West. You know, they call it the third coast because of the number of people that are moving here. 20% increase is pretty typical for most communities in the West. So there's going to be this competition for land. You know, are we going to develop it for Aspen or develop it for commercial housing? And I'm guessing if you only look at the commercial value of Aspen, I think housing is going to often win out. So I think from a standpoint of maintaining that Aspen community, we need to understand those values a little bit better. And ecosystem services, I think, will become more and more important as we see the extreme nature of flooding and hurricanes and all those things. Aspen's a pretty dynamic system that could help. So what's needed? I'd say at a minimum, it would be really great if somebody would look at a community that's very dependent upon that fall viewing and had a case study with the local Chamber of Commerce and came up with numbers associated with how it contributes to a local community. And I think Logan's probably a place you could do it. You know, there's lots of great fall viewing opportunities here. And, you know, on the East Coast, they probably already have that data, they've just not put it together. And then getting those measures of carbon sequestration, how it ranks across different tree species for sequestration, cultural uses, and then at a minimum, the values of harvest in the Intermountain West. And I think this is just a matter of someone digging down into the data, not maybe labor intensive from a graduate standpoint, but not real costly. And then just talking more about the other pieces of the pie from an economic standpoint. So there's the pieces we've captured. And now see if you have any questions from this clown of an economist up here. I love Halloween. That is me. Questions?
I was curious if, I'm from Colorado, and in Colorado you see in all the art galleries, whether it's on the plains or in the mountains, about 15, maybe to 30% of the products sold in the galleries that are images of aspen groves in the winter and the summer and the fall and stuff. And then gold jewelry that where the aspen leaves are sprayed with that. Is there a correlation from those kind of products and conservation of aspen? Is there a linkage between people wanting to buy products and images of aspen to efforts for conservation?
There is some link, and I'm not as knowledgeable in the conservation education and what it results in, but I do think that as we become more urban, that connection is lost on people more and more. That I think unless we overtly help them with that connection, that, you know, you see aspen in people's backyards, and it grows really easily if you water it in your yard. So I think that connection's being lost unless we really focus some energy on it. And, you know, just the nature shows. How many channels now are devoted to nature? And there's an awful lot of them that are related to, you know, they always have a fall aspen shot because everybody loves it. But I think that direct connection isn't as strong as it used to be because, you know, kids in the urban areas aren't getting out and enjoying nature. You know, kids in the woods is a big focus. So I'd say we're losing that connection. Yes?
Something else you might consider is aspen used as a fire and fuel break in woolly areas. It's known not to burn as readily as some other species. We're actually able to capture some fuels dollars and money to promote aspen in places that are up in the forest and surrounded by federal land.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't look at that woolly. Good one. Thank you.
That's being done
Here.
quite wide.
Okay. Oh, good one.
Just in brainstorming mode here, I would suggest potentially that the total value of aspen may not be 100% in the pie chart mode because there may be some overlap or even some conflict between different resource uses, aesthetic versus use. And so that may become some more complex at some point, depending on the proximity to developed areas or viewing sites or photograph sites or whatever. So they may not quite fit together.
Yeah, you know, I agree. It's been interesting that we've sort of seen the salvation or the focus on aspen become higher because now it's valuable. And, you know, it's always been valuable, but until something's commercial, we tend to say it's more of a nice to do than we really need to do it. And that's where, you know, it's nice that we have the visibility of new markets for aspen, but will that be in direct conflict to providing these ecosystem services that are also of great value? We just don't have the economic measure of it. So yeah, it's such a curious dynamic from an economic perspective. You know, I'm really interested in those non-market values, but until it gets a market value, we tend to think it's more of a nice to do. And so yeah, I agree that tension's going to continue and increase as we find more and more markets for commercial use of aspen, unless we use the aspen harvest as a tool to promote and maintain those ecosystem services. So if we can get that mix where it's about the habitat and not about the commercial use, I think we can keep those pies okay. But yeah, that conflict in all areas becomes pretty intense when the commercial values start to pick up. We forget that other 80% and how valuable those other pieces are. Well, I appreciate your attention early in the morning on economics, and if you have any other ideas for me, please let me know, and I'll pursue Scott Bell and see if I can at least come up with more values in the Intermountain West and not have to refer to the New England states for a case study. So thank you.